It is 2:30 in the afternoon. You are sitting in your favorite chair, the one that has finally molded perfectly to the shape of your back over the years. The house is quiet. The television is murmuring some daytime program that you are not really watching. The light coming through the blinds is warm, and you have already finished your lunch, read the paper, and maybe puttered around the kitchen or the yard for a bit. And right then a familiar heaviness settles just behind your eyes. Your shoulders drop. The ambient noise of the room seems to fade away. It is the most natural feeling in the world. You tell yourself that you have earned this. You tell yourself that at your age the body simply requires extra rest to function. You reach over, pull the lever to recline the chair, and close your eyes. You think you are doing exactly what you're supposed to do to take care of yourself. You think you are listening to your body. I know that exact sequence of events, that exact feeling of surrender, because I lived it every single day for years. I have a worn leather chair sitting right by the front window of my house here in Scottsdale, Arizona. When the afternoon sun starts baking the pavement outside and the air conditioner settles into that steady, low, comforting hum that pushes the heat away, that chair feels like the safest place in the whole world. My name is Harold Bennett. I am 81 years old. Most of my working life was spent back in Ohio, not in hospitals, but in community health education. I spent decades sitting in church basements, community centers, and union halls, trying to help folks understand what their doctors were actually saying to them. My job was to take the complicated medical manuals and translate them into plain English, the kind of language a person could actually use when they were standing at the pharmacy counter trying to make a decision or figuring out what to put on their dinner plate. I moved to the desert a long time ago with my wife, Margaret. Margaret passed away in 2019. Since then, the house has been a bit quieter, and I have found that in the quiet, routines tend to take over. The afternoon nap became my anchor. It was my reward for getting through the morning and my bridge to the evening. Margaret and I used to joke that sleeping in the middle of the day was the ultimate luxury of retirement, the prize for decades of waking up to an alarm clock in the freezing Ohio winters. But 2 years ago, I had a conversation with my doctor that completely upended how I think about rest, about aging, and about the hidden traps we set for our own bodies without even realizing it. He told me to stop napping. He did not tell me to cut back. He did not suggest I sleep in a different chair. He told me to stop entirely. I laughed at him. I literally sat there on the crinkly paper of the examination table and laughed in his office. I told him that an afternoon nap was the one undisputed privilege of surviving past 75. But he did not laugh back. He looked at me with the kind of tired, deliberate patience that I used to see on my father's face. My father worked in a manufacturing plant in Columbus for 4 decades. He was a man who understood heavy machinery inside and out, but he treated his own body like a piece of equipment that could just be powered down whenever it overheated. He ignored the maintenance until the engine simply seized up. He died ignoring pains and warning signs that he could have treated if he had just paid attention to how the machine was actually running. I promised myself a long time ago that I would never do that, so I stopped laughing and I listened to what the doctor was telling me. We all tend to think that sleep is just sleep. We think of it like putting a car in park and turning off the ignition. You turn the key, the engine stops burning fuel, and the car rests. But the human body, especially a body that has been running for 7 or 8 decades, does not work like a simple engine. When you close your eyes in the middle of the afternoon for 2 hours, you are not just resting. You are shifting gears in a highly complex transmission that might not be able to handle the sudden change in momentum when the sun goes down. My doctor explained that older bodies fight differently just to maintain a baseline of balance. When we force a massive interruption into the middle of the day, we are putting a kind of stress on the system that we cannot even feel. I want to tell you the truth about what is actually happening when we surrender to that heavy feeling at 2:30 in the afternoon, because what I learned changed my life. The first thing I had to understand was how sleep actually functions. We think of sleep as a liquid. We think we have a bucket And if we pour a little bit of sleep into the bucket during the afternoon, we just need to pour a little less in at night to fill it up. But sleep is not a liquid. Sleep is architecture. It is the foundation of a house. When you sleep for 2 hours in the middle of the afternoon, you are going down deep into REM sleep. You are pouring concrete in the middle of the day. But your body is designed to pour that concrete at night, when the temperature drops and the natural darkness signals your brain to begin the heavy construction work of cellular repair. I remember talking to my daughter Laura about this. Laura is a registered nurse up in Phoenix. She has seen more patients than I can count. She was visiting me sitting at my kitchen table drinking iced tea, and she explained it in a way that made my stomach drop. She told me that when you force your brain into deep sleep in the bright daylight, you are essentially digging up the foundation of your nighttime rest. By the time midnight rolls around, your brain has already spent its deep sleep currency. So you lie there staring at the ceiling, wondering why you are wide awake. And because you are wide awake at 2 in the morning, you are exhausted the next day. So what do? You take a nap at 2:30 in the afternoon to catch up. You create a cycle of structural failure. You tear up the foundation every afternoon, and you wonder why the house shakes every night. Laura told me that she sees patients all the time who are prescribed heavy sleeping pills for insomnia, when the reality is they do not have insomnia at all. They just have terrible architecture. They are ruining their night before the sun even goes down. Then there was the second discovery, which honestly made me feel a bit foolish. I had always assumed I was taking a nap because I was tired from the physical effort of the morning. I would spend an hour pulling weeds in the backyard before the Arizona heat got too dangerous, or I would walk down to the neighborhood mailbox and chat with the neighbors. I thought my muscles were just demanding a break. But the fatigue was not coming from the garden. It was coming from a little orange pill bottle sitting right on my bathroom counter. I take medication for my blood pressure, just like half the people I know my age. I used to take it with my lunch. It turns out that medication was reaching its peak effect exactly around 2 or 3 in the afternoon. It was doing its job, but it was dropping my blood pressure just a little bit too low during those hours. It was starving my engine of fuel right when the day was at its hottest. My heart did not have the pressure it needed to push the oxygen up to my brain efficiently, and the result was overwhelming drowsiness. I was treating a chemical imbalance with a blanket and a pillow. If I had never questioned the nap, if I had just accepted that getting old means getting tired, I would have never realized that my medication schedule was working against me. I talked to my doctor, we moved the blood pressure pill to the evening before bed, and almost overnight that crushing 2:30 fatigue evaporated. I was sleeping through the night better because the medicine was keeping my heart steady in the dark. And I was awake in the afternoon because my engine finally had the right mixture of fuel and air to keep running. But it did not stop there. That realization led me into a conversation with my son, Daniel. Daniel is a physical therapist up in Denver. He spends his entire day looking at how the human body moves, how joints bear weight, and more importantly, what happens to the body when it stops moving. I was talking to him on the phone one evening, complaining about how stiff my knees and hips felt when I finally got out of my recliner to make dinner. I told him it felt like my joints were filling up with sand. He asked me exactly how long I had been sitting in the chair without getting up. I told him it was usually about 2 hours. He went quiet for a second. Then he explained what happens to blood flow in an 80-year-old body when it is folded into a seated position for 120 straight minutes. Daniel told me to think about the body like a network of old iron pipes. When you are walking around, the water is rushing through the pipes, keeping the sediment from settling. But when you sit still, deeply asleep in a chair for 2 hours, your heart rate plummets. Your breathing grows shallow. The water in the pipes slows down to a trickle. In an older body, the veins in the legs are not as elastic as they used to be. The valves are a little worn out. When the blood pools in your lower legs for hours at a time, you are inviting trouble. You are creating the perfect environment for a blood clot, a deep vein thrombosis. That clot can break loose, travel up the pipes, and hit the lungs. It happens faster and more often than any of us want to admit. My stiffness was not just arthritis acting up, it was my circulatory system struggling to push sludge through pipes that had been shut off for 2 hours. The physical stiffness was bad, but it was not the most frightening part of my napping habit. The most frightening part was the confusion. For about 30 or 40 minutes after I would wake up from those long afternoon naps, I was entirely useless. I would walk into the kitchen, open the refrigerator door, and just stare at the shelves, trying to remember what a glass of water looked like. I would look at the clock on the stove and not immediately know if it was 3 in the afternoon or 3 in the morning. The medical community has a term for this. They call it sleep inertia. It is just a fancy way of saying your brain's engine is flooded and the spark plugs cannot fire. In a younger person, someone in their 30s or 40s, sleep inertia might last 5 minutes. They shake their head, drink some water, and get back to work. But in an older brain, a brain that has been processing information and keeping you alive for 8 decades, that fog can linger. It can last for an hour. It can make you feel like you are losing your grip on reality. I spent a whole month silently terrified that I was developing dementia. I did not tell Laura. I did not tell Daniel. I just carried this heavy, cold stone of fear in my chest, thinking that my mind was finally starting to slip away, and all along it was simply because I was forcing my brain to wake up from deep REM sleep in the middle of the afternoon. My brain was taking an hour to reboot because I kept pulling the power cord out of the wall at the wrong time of day. And that brings me to the final piece of the puzzle, the one that made me realize why my doctor was so adamant that I stop this habit. Sometimes the desperate need for an afternoon nap is not a preference. It is not a luxury. It is an alarm bell ringing inside a burning building. If you absolutely cannot stay awake through the afternoon, if your eyes are closing, no matter what you do, it might not be because you are simply getting older. It might be because you are not actually breathing when you sleep at night. I had a neighbor named Thomas a few years back who fell asleep on his porch every single afternoon. We all thought he was just a relaxed, easygoing, retired guy. It turned out he had severe sleep apnea. When Thomas went to bed at night, his airway would collapse. His brain would panic from the lack of oxygen, and it would wake him up just enough to take a gasping breath. He was doing this 40 or 50 times an hour. He was spending 8 hours in bed, but his body was running a marathon in the dark, fighting for air every single minute. No wonder he collapsed on his porch at 2 in the afternoon. His body was starving for oxygen and true rest. The nap was not a harmless habit. It was a symptom of a critical failure. By taking the nap, he was masking the emergency. He was putting a piece of tape over the warning light on the dashboard instead of taking the car to the mechanic to fix the engine. Once I understood all of this, the architecture of sleep, the timing of my medication, the danger to my circulation, the terror of the cognitive fog, and the risk of masking a real emergency, I knew I had to make a change. But knowing you need to change and actually doing it are two very different things. The first few days without my nap were miserable. 2:30 in the afternoon would roll around, and my body would start screaming for that leather chair. I felt irritable. I felt short of breath. I felt like I was being denied something that belonged to me. But I made a rule for myself based on what Laura and my doctor had told me. If I felt that wave of exhaustion hit, I would not sit down. I would go into the kitchen and drink a full, tall glass of cold water. Dehydration masquerades as fatigue in older folks more often than we realize. Our thirst mechanism breaks down as we age, and our bodies forget how to tell us they need water. So we feel tired instead. After the water, I would walk out my front door. Even if it was warm, I would walk just to the end of the driveway and back. I would force my eyes to look at the bright daylight. Daylight tells the brain that the shift is not over, that the factory is still running, and that it is not time to shut down the machinery. If I was still genuinely exhausted after the water and the sunlight, I allowed myself to rest. But I changed the rules of the rest. I bought a cheap digital timer. I set it for 20 minutes. Not an hour, not 2 hours. 20 minutes. And I did not recline the chair. I sat upright with my feet flat on the floor, keeping the blood moving through the pipes in my legs. 20 minutes is enough time to let the engine idle and cool down, but it is not enough time to fall into deep REM sleep. It is not enough time to dig up the foundation of the night. When that timer went off, I stood up, no matter how much I wanted to stay. I want to tell you about what happened after about a month of forcing myself through this new routine. I had an old friend from my working days in Ohio, a fellow named Arthur. Arthur used to be a foreman on a construction crew, a big, robust guy who never stopped moving. We kept in touch over the phone. A while back, Arthur told me he felt like he was fading away. He said he was sleeping 3 hours every afternoon and still waking up tired. He was convinced his heart was failing, or that his time was simply running short. He sounded defeated. He sounded like a man who was packing his bags for a trip he did not want to take. I sat in my kitchen, holding the phone, and I told Arthur everything I had learned. I told him about the medication masking, about the sleep architecture, about the old iron pipes and the brain fog. I told him he was not fading away, he was just managing his machinery poorly. I challenged him to stop the naps for just 2 weeks, to drink the water, to see the sunlight, to set the 20-minute timer if he absolutely had to sit down. Arthur argued with me, of course. He said he was too old to change his whole day around, but he tried it. I spoke to him a few months ago. He sounded like a different person. He had gone to his doctor and found out his diabetes medication was spiking his blood sugar in the afternoon, causing a crash that he was treating with sleep. They adjusted the dose. He stopped sleeping in his chair. He started sleeping 7 unbroken hours at night. He told me he had started fixing up an old car in his garage again, something he had not had the energy to do in 3 years. Arthur thought his life was winding down, but he was really just turning the lights off too early in the afternoon. This is what I've come to realize after all these years, after the conversations with Daniel and Laura, after the frightening moments of waking up confused in my own home. Rest is not simply an absence of movement. True rest is a biological process that has to happen at the right time in the right sequence for it to heal the body instead of harming it. When we are young, the body is incredibly forgiving. You can sleep on a bad mattress, you can stay up until 3 in the morning, you can sleep in the middle of the day, and the engine just keeps running. But after 60, after 70, after 80, the margins get thinner. The things that used to be harmless luxuries start demanding a price. An afternoon nap of 2 hours is not a replacement for real rest. It is a loan you are taking out against your nighttime sleep, and you are paying it back at an incredibly high interest rate. It costs you your clarity, your circulation, your evening energy, and sometimes it costs you the very independence you are trying so hard to protect. So, what do you do with this information tomorrow at 2:30 in the afternoon? You pay attention. If you are exhausted every single day at the exact same time, write it down. Look at the medications you took that morning. Look at how much water you have actually consumed since breakfast. Look at how you slept the night before. If you need to speak to your doctor, do not just tell them you are tired. Tell them exactly when you are tired, how long the fatigue lasts, and what you are doing to cope with it. Ask them if your prescriptions could be dropping your pressure or your sugar at the wrong time. Treat the fatigue as a clue to be investigated, not as a blanket to hide under. The independence we all want to keep, the ability to live in our own homes, to make our own meals, to walk down our own driveways, is not protected by giant, dramatic medical interventions. It is protected in the small, quiet habits of our daily lives. It is protected by making sure the engine has the right fuel, that the pipes are kept clear, and that the foundation of our rest is poured at the right time of day. The body does not ask for things twice in the same way. What you ignore today can very easily limit you tomorrow. But the good news, the thing that keeps me walking out my front door into the bright Arizona sun every afternoon, is that the body also responds when you finally start treating it right. It is never too late to reset the clock. It is never too late to change the routine. You have the power to restructure your day. You have the ability to ask the hard questions and to push through the temporary discomfort for a long-term gain. I learned this late, perhaps later than I should have, but I am still here and I am still learning. And so are you. Take care of yourselves today. Keep asking questions. Keep moving forward, and I will talk to you again soon.